I can't believe it. I'm here online on Twitch again. It feels like it's been like 4 years since I've been here. Welcome to GitHub Education on Twitch. We are here. We're here because there's a lot going on in August and September, especially in the world of education. Anyone who's ever been a student, many of you in the audience that are currently students as well, know that August and September tend to be very involved when it comes to education, especially in Western countries. It's when we get started. August is when students go back to school. September, you're kind of like really in the swing of things now. Some schools don't start till September, but generally these 2 months are very important for education. And in that spirit, why wouldn't GitHub Education do something around coming what's the phrase? Oh yeah, back to school. So why wouldn't we do something here with back to school? And I think that we got some things going on, and this is really the first thing. It's August 7th. We're just getting started here. Many of you are tuning in, saying hello, Moon Knight, hello, Chris Jarvis, hello everyone. Thanks for coming through. But yeah, we are in back to school season. Everyone's getting their new clothes, the new backpack. If it's 1997 where you're living, you're wrapping your textbooks in like paper bags that you can then write all over. Does anyone remember book covers? Everyone remembers book covers. Maybe Gen Z doesn't. But we're here today because this month of August, we're doing 3 streams here on GitHub Education. And the first stream is going to be with someone that many of you will be familiar with if you've watched the streams on this channel before. Moon Knight, first off, you do not need to subscribe to us because that gives us money and we don't really need it. Just follow. We don't need subscribers. We appreciate that. Sharon with orange covers were the best. Orange was for, what subject did I always use orange for? I think I used history. Orange was always history for me. Green is science. If you don't pick a green folder or a green cover for science, you're wrong. But we're here with a very special guest. I got myself distracted. Very familiar if you've been watching this stream. And that is going to be Becca from Opensauced. And Becca's here to talk to us about Opensauced and 100 days of, not code, something slightly different. Becca, what do we have 100 days of here?
OSS. It's all things open source here.
We're super stoked to bring you 100 days of OSS, some open source software stuff, and Becca's going to be guiding us through what you can do to get involved. But before we get into that, Becca, we didn't even really get to chat before the show, but how have you been? What have you been up to? What's going on? How's life?
Life is great. Kids are home. I've got 4 kids, getting ready to send them back to school so I can have some focus time. But it's been a great summer. Happy to be back here again and to be kicking this off. I'm blurry. I'm sorry. I'm in Ohio and the weather is really bad. So connectivity is not great. I apologize in advance. I'll drop you all the links I possibly can.
Ohio's just a little blurry right now, y'all. You're just going to have to excuse Ohio for the time being. So, Becca, 100 days of open source. I keep wanting to say 100 days of open sauce, which, I wouldn't mind if y'all out there did 100 days of open sauce, by the way, as a challenge, only working with open source stuff. Actually, yeah, you did just clear up a lot.
Guess the clouds parted.
That we made room in the cloud for clouds this time. But when we talk about, normally when you hear 100 days earlier, I mentioned 100 days of code, a very popular thing for new learners to do when they're trying to learn how to code. It's like, here's 100 days straight where I learned coding and worked on stuff. Is that kind of the same concept here with 100 days of open source? Let's talk about this a little bit, about what we're up to.
Yeah, so we were definitely inspired by 100 days of code when I was learning to code, and when I was in boot camp about 5 years ago, I was found a lot of community, and I found just a lot of energy to be able to keep going. And so I did 3 rounds of 100 days in code. I think I did a little over 300 days, and it was great. But also that's exhausting, right? And that's not for everyone. Not everybody has the opportunity or the ability to just continually work on that stuff. And so one of the things I've been really mindful of when encouraging new folks to get into things is like making sure you don't burn yourself out, because that's a long-term problem. You don't want to get stuck there. And so when I was thinking about Opensauced doing this initiative last year, I wanted to take that inspiration and recognize that, like, hey, community is incredibly important to the success of anything that we're doing. We achieve our goals much better when we know that we have support, when we know there are other people around. So let's do that, but let's do it in a more lightweight way where anyone can participate. And one of the things about open source is there's so many different ways to contribute. Let's not just say code. Let's talk about getting involved in communities, answering questions, reading documentation, writing blog posts, creating videos. Like, all of these different things are great ways to get involved in the open source community. And that way people can start contributing and being helpful before you even know how to code. And you can just kind of like grow up in the open source ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think like largely when people hear about open source, not for the first time, but when they hear about getting involved in open source, the very first thing everyone thinks of is code. Oh, well, I have to help build the app. I have to help write code. And it's so important that people realize that there's so many ways to contribute to open source software that are not writing code and making the app. Like there's a bunch of ways to get involved. And I love that you're highlighting that ability for people to get involved who might not otherwise know about it. That's super important. Well, Becca, I mean, let's do you want to just get into it? I feel like that was a great preamble and it really showed us exactly what we need to do, or rather it told us about what's going on. So we've got let's talk about these beginner projects that you gave us. Can we start there? Is that okay?
Yeah, that would be great. So at Opensauced, we have this thing called a workspace, and it kind of helps you to get started. And so I'm working on adding to this. So if anybody has ideas for beginner friendly projects, please send them my way and I can add them. Likewise, if you're interested in helping me as in more of an admin role of adding things, you can DM me on Twitter. I'm happy to add some folks in there. But the idea is just to continually add new projects. And it doesn't mean that these are the projects that you have to add to, but I want to make sure that people have the opportunity to explore different things. Because the other thing, you might be a beginner, you might be advanced, but also you might be doing JavaScript while somebody else is doing Rails or Python. And so I would like to create, as much of a variety as possible for folks. And we can even break these down into separate lists if we find like, oh, here's 10 easy or beginner friendly Python projects, then I can add them to their own list and we can continue sharing. Do you have a little bit about days? Oh, yes. Let me go ahead and share my screen so I can kind of like walk you through some of the things that we're doing. All right, here we go. Sharing my screen. So I have this blog post that gives you a little bit more information about, what can you expect from 100 days. We're doing it a little bit differently than we did last year. Last year, it was just, here are a bunch of ideas. Do it however you want. It was great. Really enjoyed it. But this year, there was a little bit of a need for like, hey, can you also give us a little bit of structure too? And so we're doing these weekly prompts. This kind of talks about like, okay, what is the idea here? Why do we want to do this? And then we have this GitHub discussion. And I will drop this in the private chat if you all can drop it into the main chat. This is where we're doing all of the communication and the weekly discussion prompts. So you'll see that this is pinned on the Opensauced discussions, and it gives you a little bit of an overview. Each week, I'll link to the new discussion there. I asked that everybody thread, but sometimes it's hard to remember what that is or how to do it. So we have quite a few people that did thread, about 100 people that didn't. So I just want to make sure that you can follow along. So this will link you to the documentation with lots of different ideas. If you're like, I don't really want to follow along and have this conversation, I want to do it on my own. Exactly, Josh. I've given up on threading in so many Slacks too. It's just like, all right, well, it used to bother me. It's just,
I can't
not
be the
even look
only
good.
one doing it. That makes me crazy, right? It's like, ah.
Yeah. Do we have all of this here? I do have a link to those beginner-friendly projects here, and then the link to the week discussion. So I think I have that open here. And I kind of break it down into tasks. I'll put all of our events in there too. So if you want to follow along, Opensauced does have a newsletter that goes out every other week. And so all of that information I think is useful to help understanding like what is it to be an open source? Who are people that I should be interested in open source? So we have this event right now. Making friends is important. So you have a little bit of community building, and then here's some ideas for like how to keep track of what you're doing. What is the first step? We have our intro to open source course. That's a really great way to do it. But there are other things that you can be doing as well. So again, this is just like, let's get started, work on this together. But if you're doing something else, go ahead and share that with us too, so we can cheer you on and get ideas and inspiration from each other.
It's amazing. And so is there going to be a new discussion? Is that each week there'll be a new discussion through each of the 100 days?
Yes. So, however many weeks that is, maybe around 15, 12 to
15
15. Are
weeks.
you
Oh my
mathing?
gosh. Yeah, you shouldn't trust me to math though. I'm a poet by trade, so the
Same.
only thing I can count is lines and stanzas and syllables sometimes.
Syllables are hard. Let's see. English teachers mathing, exactly.
That's right.
Um, But it will be at the top. So, like I said, I'll link to each week discussion at the top. Next week, we're also going to talk about being able to track your progress and what that looks like for you. So, we'll have some metrics for you if you're interested in saying, like, I would love to see how I grow. I've read a lot of the introductions. I haven't read all of them yet because I think there are 200. Keep
Ooh.
adding them. I'll get to them eventually. Um, but saw a lot of people say like, I want to be able to see that I've grown. So I think that's important for a lot of people. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I'm also going to try and do one event every single week, maybe more. The beginner project link is broken. I think I just clicked it. Oh
Oh,
no.
it does say 400 bad requests.
Why?
Is it
Beginner.
because I clicked it earlier and it worked for me? That's interesting.
Oh, yeah, and it just went oss.fyi/beginner project. Okay. Here, I'll give you
Interesting.
I think that's just the short link that's not working. So you can also I think it was working. So we use dub.co for short links and tracking, which is great. I love it. But my
Oh,
guess is that that's the issue there. So yeah, you can check these out, and it's our this
there
is
we
our
go.
intro, the link to our intro course. We also have a becoming maintainer course, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the 100 days, because I think that it's very important as a contributor to learn what goes into being a maintainer. It helps you to become a better contributor. So I know that sounds like
Absolutely.
maybe counterintuitive or like I don't understand, but
Ooh.
but I can say from experience, I became a much better contributor after I was a maintainer.
I think it's important because often contributors see things only from their point of view, and I think a lot of where open source needs to make sure that we're growing is understanding that maintainers have a very different set of problems and issues that they have to address than a contributor does. And if both parties can understand each other better, it's often easier for a maintainer to understand a contributor because usually you've been a contributor by the time you become a maintainer. But the other way of that street is often a little bit harder. So I agree with you that knowing how maintainers work and knowing what maintainers face makes for a better contributor because you're already thinking in terms of what this person is trying to accomplish and how you can fit in with that, which truly in any open source project, you're trying to help the maintainer achieve something and be a part of that group that helps everyone achieve something. So the more that you understand what they're up to, I think the better that relationship will be over time for sure.
Yeah, and 100% Chris says it helps earn empathy towards maintainer and what they need. I could not say it better. That's perfect. It can be really challenging to be a maintainer. It takes up a lot of time. And yes, Josh also agrees with the empathy portion of that. So
Yeah,
thanks for
yeah,
pointing it out.
fantastic.
Yeah, so we have these. We'll continue to add here. So just a little overview in case you're trying to navigate through here. The idea here is to make this my workspace for this project specifically. So I'll add those beginner-friendly repos. But next week, when we talk about being able to track yourself, in the Contributor Insights tab, there will be a 100 Days of OSS page there, and you'll be able to see everyone that is participating in the discussions. And then we'll talk about that. So I'll have those contributor insights here. It would be great if I can find folks who are willing to mentor contributors. If that happens, then we'll also have a link to that in the contributor insight page. But that will be probably more towards Hacktoberfest, so in October. So if you want to mentor, or if you know someone that does, let me know, and then I can get you added in for that coming down the road. I doubt I can do a one-to-one match, but at least there will be some support out there.
Yeah. So anyone out there that's sort of like got a little bit of experience in open source, that sort of knows when you're looking at this, you're like, yeah, I know what I'm up to, and you feel comfortable. If you feel comfortable, definitely reach out about becoming a mentor and seeing how you can help. If you're like, I don't think I can do it, I've only done 17 open source projects. Well, you're who we're looking for. I mean, like, you're the person who has the experience. So if you're brand new, never done it before, come through and learn. If you've got at least a little bit of experience, consider sharing your experience. That's what a mentor does. You just share your experience and what you've learned over time with everyone else. So please, Becca, you said that'll be closer to October, right? As we get to Hacktoberfest.
Yeah, but if you keep looking back to the discussion board, all the updates I'll put in there, so you can check that out, and I'll probably tweet them out. I use Twitter, X, whatever, more than other social media platforms, so you can check it out there. And I'll probably add it to our newsletter. So the newsletter is another good source of truth. So
Yeah, make sure
yeah,
you're
check that
signing up for
out.
that.
And actually, there's a link to the newsletter. Oh, where is the link to the newsletter? Maybe in this post.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
always fun when you're like, and you can go here and you're like, wait, how did I get there? And like, you have to
Yeah,
remember where
right.
you've got that link. Yeah. Good times.
So that could be useful for you. Oh, look at all these notifications. I'm immediately distracted. Stop. So we do have that information. I'm happy to add folks in there. We have we also have our documentation that talks a little looking at this and you're like, hey, there's nothing that I want to do that you shared this week. There are so many different ways that you can do it. And so I'd love to touch a little bit on that, if that's okay, PJ.
Yeah, please touch on it.
So we have this broken down. Actually, one of our contributors last year reorganized this page for me, and I'll probably update it again. But I will say it required the ability to clone and fork a repository and to use Markdown. So, not really any code, and to create a pull request. So, in terms of writing code, there was not really any code written. It was just being able to use GitHub.
Yeah.
So I'll also try and put together a list of resources. If you have ideas for resources, let me know that I can add to the bottom of this page. So if folks are unsure of how to create a pull request, that's actually in our intro course. You can add it there. But here's the thing. So again, one of the things that was important for us is if you need a day off during this 100 days, take a day off. If you haven't started yet, it's not too late to start. You just adjust your own 100 days. We're just making sure that we provide all this extra support for you during these 100 days through Hacktoberfest and a little bit of follow-up afterwards, so you can be part of a community experience of this. And then you can keep going, or you can share it with others or encourage other folks to start. I think, that take a break if you need a break. That's really important. And I want to emphasize that.
I
And
think it's very easy with things like this to be like, "Oh, I missed the start, so I'm not gonna hit 100 days, so
yeah,
why do it?" That's not true. Start where you can. "Oh, I missed a day, now I'm done." Also not true. 100 days of code is a goal, and or 100 days of OSS is a goal, and I think it's important to know that, like, sometimes in a goal, you get, like, 60%, 70%. If you do 60 days of OSS, that's 60 more days of experience you have than you did before. So within the framework, you don't have to be perfect. What's the perfect is the enemy of good. It is
yeah.
okay to get in there and be like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it Thursday. I was just too busy. Totally fine. Jump in Friday, jump in Saturday. Just come back and work again because, like, you will convince yourself not to do something when you could have done a little bit of something and it would have benefited you.
Yeah, and that's it too. There's not a time period. We're not saying like spend a half an hour every day. We're saying like, hey, go read some documentation or join an open source community that you can explore.
Mhm.
Lurk around a little bit. Like that's a valuable part of the open source experience. A lot of people say like, well, how do I get started? Like lurk.
Yep.
You don't have to be pushing code to be a valuable part of the community. There's also, I want to point this out. I think it's here. Okay, so in the post for this week, we have templates that you can use to track your 100 days. So there's two templates that we have. If you want to submit another template, let me know. I'm totally happy to do that. So this is a GitHub template repository. So you can just use this template and you can keep up to date on your own. So you can set your own goals. You can, fill this in as needed. There's instructions there. If there are any issues with that, please raise an issue and then we'll fix it. And there you go. If you raise an issue, that's your contribution for the day. You've done your work.
Yeah, yeah,
And
there you go.
along with that, we have a Notion template. So this is from Abdurrahman. He's one of our other community members that put it together just to, especially if people aren't familiar yet with GitHub, here is an opportunity for you to copy this Notion template and to be able to use it. So I am not a Notion user. I am an Obsidian user, but I can see how this would be valuable. So the point is, do it in a way that works for you. If you need help keeping
Mhm.
track, these are great ways to help you with that. And we just want to like make sure that we support you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we talked about how I think we in our previous series, which if you haven't seen the previous series that Becca and I did here on GitHub Education, we talked about how open source work can be really beneficial for students in sort of showing off what you've done and gaining experience. And we talked about how it can be kind of like an internship. One of the things that anyone that's ever talked about open source talks about is that contributing to open source is a thing you get to put on your resume. You get to tell people I contributed. And not only did you contribute, you can point them to the exact things that you did. Here's the commits I made. Here's the repos that I created as part of this. Here's the issues I brought up. Here's the bugs I fixed. Here's the documentation I wrote. It all goes into showing off the work that you've done. So, especially contributing to open source, it creates all these artifacts that then become part of your job search. So, if you are a student who's just graduated, if you are a student who's looking to next year when you graduate and you're wondering, how do I get experience? How do I do this? How do I do it? Open source is a great way to do it. And if you haven't gotten started yet, well, here's a great template. Here's 100 days to get started.
Absolutely. And I would say, as part of this and talking about the job hunt as well, one of the things that I've heard from a lot of people is that adding some sort of mentorship to your skill set can be incredibly valuable to show that you're able to communicate, you're able to work with other people, that you can support them. And so, hey, there's 200 people in the discussions right now. I guarantee there's someone out there that could use help. So if people are asking questions in the discussions, and you can answer those questions, that's a great way to showcase that. And I think that we don't want to undervalue that. That's also a really great story to tell, whether that's in an interview or on a cover letter. But being able to tell these stories of how you shared with other people and how you supported them and help them to succeed reflects on what kind of teammate that you'll be. So there's another way that open source experience can be a really good resume in a job search builder.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So, what are some other things that we've got here? How are we helping people get started? What have we been working on? Actually, what is the focus this week for your discussion post?
So the focus this week is on keeping track of what you're doing and completing the 100 days, or not the, no, completing the intro to open source course. So
Mhm.
we have the course. Let's open it up here. Um, you can go ahead and click on it there and you walk through it. So this is what I would say. This is a lot of people stop at how to contribute to open source because you get there's a PR that happens at the end of this. And number one, I will say I am a little bit slow right now at merging those PRs in because one of my maintainers is on vacation. So don't get freaked out if you see there's 50 open PRs there. We'll get to them eventually. You'll get merged in. But I would say there's more information beyond that. So a lot of people stop when they get to that chapter, but I would say definitely browse through the rest of these. Types of open source contributions can also help you to better understand the open source ecosystem. There's not just one type of contribution. You don't necessarily have to commit for it to be valuable.
Mhm.
So definitely take a look at that. If you have questions, ask the questions. If you need help, ask help. Tag me in the discussions. It'll make it easier for me to see if you need something specifically from me. Or you can create an issue if you see a problem with the course on GitHub. So also feel free to star my repository. Look, we're at
Ooh.
507. That's so many.
How many
Anyway,
did you have last time you checked?
I don't
10.
know. But I'm excited about it.
That's really good. That's a great amount of stars. People are paying attention, Becca. You're going places.
Maybe. I think I'm going down the street to pick up my kid from practice soon.
Not while I'm drinking water, please. Awesome. So that course, and this is something that I think a lot of people often trick themselves into thinking. For something like 100 days of open source, it's gonna feel like I need to do something very concrete. And earlier you're like, no, lurking
Mhm.
works. Just reading stuff works. You are getting involved when you are reading and learning. But
Yeah.
we often judge ourselves, and I think you remember this as being a teacher. You see students who judge themselves on output as opposed to the full length of time and what they accomplish. Often there are days and days of only receiving input in order to actually create the output later. You have to get the lecture before you can create the new thing. And I think it's hard to, even professionally, I deal with this, to know that sometimes the work is reading and
Yeah.
listening and taking in information. That's part of the work you have to do. That does take time. If you have to build, let's say, if you have to create an issue in an open source repository, and because you're looking to contribute, and here's my idea, this is the issue I've created, here's what I'm looking to do for y'all, it takes time to create the issue, but to have read enough ahead of time to be able to create the issue, that's part of the time. So make sure you are giving yourself the time to read and understand and take this course. You can't say, "Oh, I'm doing 100 days of open source, but I got to take this course first. I haven't started yet." You start the instant you start taking in information that will eventually turn into something that you synthesize. So make sure you're giving yourself grace and giving yourself space to do learning first when it is something new. I have no idea. I felt like
Yeah,
I
I
had to
think
tell
that's
the
so
people what I
important.
was
And
feeling.
I sometimes will like end the day and feel like I've accomplished nothing, but it's exactly what you're saying, PJ. Like I've spent a lot of time understanding a topic more deeply or really thinking through like, okay, how does this impact a project or a contributor or something like that? And so it can feel like you haven't because there's no checkbox for that. Like I thought a lot today, like that's not on my to-do list. Uh,
It's on
but
mine.
I think like it's a valuable skill. and you're learning a new skill as you contribute to open source. And so that's important to recognize that, there might be days that are more frustrating, or there might be a concept that you think is going to be simple, but it's not. Or like, actually, this is the first live stream I think that we've done that I haven't pushed something, pushed some code or some documentation right before. And it's usually because I'm like, this is going to be a quick fix. And then I'm like, oh, this is not quick, right? Just like, don't use those words. You're just jinxing yourself.
Quick and fix are antithetical words to each other.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight this portion of the course. So, talking about reading the documentation. Hey, you might have to read documentation one day and do something else the next day. You might have to read the documentation multiple days in a row. Sometimes it can be really challenging to get through. And so this talks about creating issues too. One of the things about creating issues, super valuable. It's great feedback for maintainers, but also it's only great feedback if you take the time to write a good issue. So don't
Yep.
just say like, I had this problem. Okay, how did you have that problem? Where did you come across it? What browser are you on? Can you provide a screenshot?
Uh-huh.
Can you provide a recording or something like that? So we're also like through this course trying to help you develop best practices to be a good contributor, because I think that's really important. You don't just want to be a contributor. Talk about searching for a job. If you don't take your time and you're just if you're sloppy, if you're not a good communicator, if you're mean to maintainers, that information is out there too for people to look at. And I can tell you for sure that I know that there are people out there that are avoided by companies and by people and teams because of the way they behaved or treated people in open source. So I know you all are great people out there and you're all super kind and empathetic, but I just
That's
want to
right.
emphasize that if you're having a bad day, walk away before you leave that comment.
If you're having a bad day, get out of here and come back until you're feeling better.
So yeah, definitely look through that. This gives you information on how to create a PR to one of our repositories. And I will say we spend quite a bit of, we actually have saved replies as maintainers in that repository correcting people on what they've done wrong because they have not read the directions. So again, this is one of those things. Take the extra 5 minutes, read the directions, do what's asked of you, and then we can say this is awesome. We're merging it in right now, rather than can you do this thing that we've already asked you to do.
Exactly. And because those instructions and those guidelines are already out there, you said take the extra 5 minutes to read. Oftentimes 5 minutes of reading and making sure you really know saves in days of back and forth to make sure that you're actually getting it correct. So every maintainer would rather that you take 5 to 30 minutes more to make sure you know exactly what they're asking you to do instead of assuming that you know what needs to go in the issue, as opposed to now both of you are taking days and back and forth and it's all asynchronous and it's all sort of like it's becoming a trudgery just to get this issue recognized because you didn't do it in the right format. So it's always better to take 30 minutes beforehand, however long it takes to read everything first and then act, as opposed to acting before you know the whole story. That's jumping to conclusions, and you don't want to do that.
You do not. That's not good. We don't want that. So again, just go through, check that out, make sure that you know what you're doing. And I think that's a really great place to get started. Where did I put that tab?
This is always
There, I put it
so much
there.
fun. Where did I put the tab?
And this is not, I can't even tell you how many windows and tabs I have open. I am a prolific tab opener.
Oh man, I use Arc, and I just open up a new tab for basically everything. And after 12 hours, there's like a line on Arc browser, and underneath that line, after 12 hours, it just gets rid of the tab for you. So if you want to keep it, move it up. But if it's just something that I open to get something done, it just disappears after 12 hours. And I know you shook your head. I've learned to love it. I used to be a prolific tab person. Now I never have more than like 15 that are really staying on my browser.
It's my like ADHD, out of sight, out of mind. So eventually I go through all the tabs and then I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that I have to do this thing, or this was important for me to look at. So until I have completed that portion of my life, that tab
It's
will
your
remain
to-do list,
open.
right?
Yes, essentially.
Yep. Yep.
Even though
Yep.
I have like so many notebooks writing all of the things down. Doesn't matter. I need the tabs
I
as well.
mean, yeah, I have 2 notebooks open here. I threw 4 on the ground earlier because I was like, I don't need those right now during the stream, but this is my life is multiple places of information. I'm glad we're the same. Every time we stream together, we learn there's something else about us that's really similar. So
I can
let's
talk a
keep
little bit
going. What's
more
next?
about these, or do you want to, or grab questions? What would you rather do? Questions? I know there are some in the
I think
chat.
there was a question in the chat that was asking. They've contributed to projects under Opensauced in the past. They're saying it'll be a hot repo. I think this is for like Oktoberfest. This is from Demi BK in the chat. Is it possible to contribute to that project
Mhm.
or any other project in open source? Let me see.
Yeah, I would say in open source repositories, right now, the hot repo, we're just kind of not actively maintaining it. So I wouldn't encourage contributions there. But there are plenty of other ways to contribute in open source. And you can always contribute, make multiple contributions to different open source projects. And one of the things that I would also recommend is you don't have to look at 10 different projects. I would say maybe have an idea of 3 different projects you're interested in and then focus on one of them, because it decreases the barrier to entry if you only have to learn once. So you only have to go through their process, because every project will have different contributing guidelines that you need to read, and you need to learn how to get started. And so, I think that it's easier to focus on one project, learn about their community, learn about what their goals are and their values and how they support each other, and make that contribution there, rather than saying, like, I'm going to contribute to 10 different projects. It makes it much harder for you to achieve that goal. So
Yeah.
I would say our guest book is attached to the intro project. We also have the intro course, the 2 courses. So if there's something that you see there that could be improved or updated, we haven't reviewed it in, I don't know, a couple of months. So that can always be improved, I think. And then we also have the Pizzaverse repository, which is a project that is devoted to helping you get into the flow of using GitHub. And so, again, you're just learning how to contribute to a project by giving, it was initially just pizza facts and recipes, but we have expanded it to all forms of cuisine. So
Okay.
if there's something that you're interested in there, you can contribute, and it's to go through that flow, because it can be hard if you haven't created a PR. You have to kind of like practice at it, and this is a good way to practice.
Projects to get jump started. Experience front end. Recently quit the job. Want to get back into open source. Contributed to SUSE. Suggestions on projects can jumpstart. I mean, I feel like a lot of this is like there's a bunch of like example projects that are available that are good to get started with.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading through that question. Do you have
Uh-huh.
suggestions for any projects I can jump in? I know that our app repository has some open issues there. So it's Opensauced /app. So you can check that out. But if you go through the intro course, it also gives you information on how to explore different projects and to take a look at things. So that might be another good way to get started, and to find some good projects that will work for you.
Bird. So it was my bad. I did skip a question from Dev Harsh. Plans for an open source mobile app.
We are a team of 8 people, and we are trying to make everything mobile friendly, but there are not currently plans for a mobile app, but that would be sweet.
That would be sweet. Yeah, 8 people. Y'all don't have a mobile app already? Um, Does anyone know of good documentation for contributing to open source using GitHub Desktop? Oh, you think I know it? Why would I know it? Uh, contributing to open source using GitHub Desktop. I mean, isn't GitHub Desktop just kind of like a UI for GitHub? Right? That's the only way I've ever used it. I have GitHub Desktop. I use pull, push, end of list. Like that's all I do with that. In fact, I want to open it now and see if I'm
I'm
missing
Googling
something.
it.
Right?
Maybe that's the
All right.
blog post I write this week or next week.
Yeah, it's just a UI for Git. Oh, so it's like you want like a walkthrough of how to use. Oh, okay. I mean, yeah, people find it easier than terminal. I find just using the source control on VS Code easiest because I'm in VS Code all the time. But if you're not in VS Code, I know for sure there's like how to use GitHub Desktop out there for sure. For sure. Please use terminal. Stop it, Dev Harsh. Stop it. Yeah, it does. I don't know. That's kind of how I learned to use Git first was GitHub Desktop, but there's so many different ways to do it that really whatever works for you, use it. And thank you for the docs getting started with GitHub Desktop from GitHub Education. Thanks, Morgan, our producer in the back. Yeah, I'd say just like the standard using it in general, and then you just apply that to whatever you're working on, when you're working locally. Also, I tend to not even work locally. I just use like code spaces whenever I can, honestly. Becca, do you work locally usually, or are you just working like in the cloud usually? Did I lose you, Becca? Becca,
I
can you
don't
hear
know if
me?
you can hear me, but everything is frozen for me. So give me a
Oh no!
second here to
I
figure
knew
this out.
something had happened. This
I
Ohio
can
weather,
hear you
it's killing me.
now. You're not
Okay,
moving though.
good. I will keep talking though. At least you're moving and you're talking, so we can hear you. I think you just skipped a little, but like, yeah.
Okay.
Um, what was I asking? Oh, I got myself so derailed now. Oh, Becca, do you do work locally and then push, or do you just do work in like code spaces and stuff? Where do you tend to do your work? Oh no, did it freeze again?
I tend to work locally. I actually don't know that I've used GitHub code spaces. I don't know if I should mention that or not. But I don't think I did use code spaces once, but that's it.
That's it. We got thank you for the link, Morgan. Again, Becca mentioned a link regarding a project list for front end, and there's that link there from Morgan and GitHub Education. Git and VS Code is enough. It's pretty easy from Chris Karakok. But I mean, I think a lot of people think their version is really easy. Yeah, combo of terminal and VS Code GUI. Every once in a while, I type a git command in the terminal, but not often. But I do like that we're naturally highlighting all the different ways that you can do the exact same thing. And I think that that's kind of an important note in open source as well. Earlier, you mentioned, Becca, and it made me sort of realize how similar everything is and yet how different. Every single project's going to have different contribution guides, and they're expecting that you're familiar with it. So your advice about pick 3 projects that you kind of want to work with, but then just focus on one at a time is really good advice, because it can be really easy to be like, all right, let me look at this project. All right, that's not for me. Let me look at this project. Okay, maybe. Let's open an issue. Let's get started. Let's get going. But taking the time to really make sure you understand what it is they want from contributors, how they expect contributors to act. I'd say like a few days of making sure you understand that first, no matter what project you're contributing to, is what makes it a better experience for everybody. So when you're talking about all these different ways of doing things, yeah, getting the one that is going to work best for you, but take the time to learn it completely, so that way you're not caught off guard by not being able to do something. Ooh, it's a rough question.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part of that too, I would say is I'll try and get to that question. If you are interested in contributing to multiple projects, then sometimes staying in the same ecosystem or in the same organization can also decrease some of that friction to entrance. So like in Opensauced, for example, all of our contributing guidelines are pretty similar. You should still read them because different repositories have different guidelines, but we're generally the same. We have 8 people on the team, like I said, 8 or 9. And so you're interacting with the same people, you're building relationships. That's the other thing about open source. It's not just about the things that we can see on the screen. It's about the relationships that we develop. And so keeping that in mind, you're building that relationship the more that you're contributing to the same project. And so people are like, oh, hey, I know PJ, he's pretty cool. And PJ is like, oh, hey, I got this job. Are you interested in it? Or someone reached out to me for a job and I'm super happy at GitHub right now. So I like you. You know what you're doing. Are you interested in me making an introduction for you?
And I think that like knowing that open source really is about relationships is important.
Okay, so for that question, let's see. Instead of development, what are business-oriented plans for Opensauced and your vision towards its expansion? Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about right now. We shipped something that I'm really excited about that maybe you might not be excited about, but hopefully you will be excited about soon. It's called the Open SSF Scorecard. And so we now have it on our repository pages and our workspaces. So what does that even mean? We are focusing on, with this feature, making sure that you can see if your projects or the projects that you use have are using good security and compliance measures. And so this is one of those things that is not easily surfaced in open source very much. And so we're trying to make that experience for maintainers to see, like, number one, is my project safe and secure? If it's not, how can I improve that? We're not to the how can I improve it part yet, but we're going to get there. Right now, you can just see the score of the project. And so essentially, what we're doing is finding more ways for people to understand what's happening in open source projects. And so we have a paid version of the project that allows organizations to track more contributors and track more repositories. And then that way they can get valuable information like that. How are these projects secure? What about the dependencies that I'm using for my project? Are they following safe practices? And if not, what can we do about it? Or, hey, I'm interested in using this dependency. I better go check and see if they are, in compliance. How do I do that? Well, this is a pretty quick way to be able to do that. Actually, well, I don't need to share. I'm not currently sharing, but that's okay. So anyway, the point is, like, the more value that we provide, the more data that we surface, the more valuable it is for people to be using the product. Because I think like 90% of products use open source software in some way. So it's very important to know, is this safe? Are there people actively developing and maintaining this project? Do we have one maintainer that's pushing all the code? Are they pushing directly to main? That last one we call YOLO coders. And we consider that not a best practice to push directly to main, and that it does impact the safety of the project. So again, something that you should think about as well as a contributor. This is why you want to fork and branch and not just try and push directly into a project, because you can accidentally ship in code or a change that could break the project or increase vulnerabilities in the project, things like that. So again, this goes back to best practices and making sure that the software that we're all using is secure.
Fantastic. And someone once talked to me about the importance of making sure your dependencies are working correctly. And there it is. That's that book. We're going to talk about that in a second. Someone told me it's easier to make sure that the pieces of the salad are correct before you make the salad than to take the entire salad and try and fix it there. If you know the tomatoes are sourced correctly, you don't have to worry about it later. If you didn't check anything beforehand and you're having to check it all once the salad's assembled, you're going to miss something. So it's important to know that your dependencies are coming from a place you want them to. The reason I brought it up, and Quantal, we're going to get to your question in a second. Schizophrenic web developer, what's the difference between OSS and FOSS? It is a complicated, interesting history. And the two groups are, it's really kind of hard to say, but that book that Becca just held up, the Working in Public, the Making and Maintaining of Open Source Software, everyone involved in open source should read that book. It is unreal good. It is fantastic. I did it as a book club back when I worked at my first job in tech, and it really opened my mind and helped me understand the difference between open source and free and open source, even though I can't articulate that very well right now. I do like the question from Quano. I like a few projects, but how do I pick the one? And I mean, that's kind of hard to really explain without knowing you individually, but it's very similar to, I think, of like the type of friends that you want to be around and like the type of relationships you want to have. And earlier, Becca said, as I point the wrong way, Becca said, open source is a lot about relationships. But Becca, what would you say? How do you kind of pick the open source project that seems like the one you really want to get involved with?
I think for me, it was really important to be part of a community of people that were kind of working on something similar. It can be scary to contribute to an open source project. And so knowing like, okay, I know these people, they're nice, they're going to be patient with me. They're going to be understanding. There's not a timeline. Some projects, are moving so quickly that it's like, yeah, you can take on this issue, but we need it done in 2 days. If you have that time, that's great. But not a lot of people, or some people don't perform well under pressure like that for the first time. And so I think it's valuable to figure out, like, number one, what are your goals for the project, for your contribution? Number two, what is your skill level? And do like a really honest assessment. I actually have a blog post. I'll try and find it. It's about assessing your skills before contributing to open source. And then looking at the language that you want to contribute to. So that should be, or the language of the project, and whether or not that's the type of language that you are most comfortable working in. And so if you're interested in documentation, I hear Astro. Actually, I've contributed to Astro documentation. Super easy. They were really nice and really great, and I just fixed some broken links. That was it. Some of the other contributions I've done, it's been the same thing. I've gone through a tutorial. The tutorial doesn't work because they're missing a step in the directions, or something has changed. And so then I create an issue. I say, hey, it would make it clear for the reader if you have this information. I'm happy to do the PR. So I will say that definitely those are some considerations, but it's okay to like look around and get comfortable with things. But I like to start from the community aspect and to have that question. And I know my boss, Brian Douglas, B. Dougie, has a blog post called Good First Issues Don't Exist. And the idea is the best issue that you work on is the one that you write yourself. So if you find a problem, if you find a pain point, if you find a bug, then start there and then kind of make your way through.
Man,
I just dropped in the Sorry, I was like, just want to backtrack 1 second. Morgan, I dropped in the chat. I also led a book club on working in public, the making and maintenance of open source software. I did it through a community I run, Virtual Coffee. But you can go back and look through all of the questions and the conversations that we had if you're interested. So I think there's some valuable takes there. Yes, thank you. You can, Morgan just dropped that. So GitHub Education, the book club convo is there for more resources.
Awesome. I love that when you're thinking about like where you want to contribute to, how do I find the one, what you said, Becca, about kind of like knowing yourself too, and what it is that you really want to get out of it. I think a lot of people hear from people like you and me and anyone who talks about open source, get involved, go out and do it. And a lot of people are like, okay, I'm getting involved. Why? And I think you have to decide. We talk a lot about the benefits of contributing to open source, but you as an individual have to decide why it is that you are doing it. What is it that you are contributing to open source for? And when you know better what it is that you're doing it for, you know better how you want to do it. And then you know better who you want to contribute to and with. And if you haven't done that work at first of sort of like understanding yourself better and knowing what you hope to get out of it, it will feel like you're wandering around without a purpose. It will feel like you don't know what you're doing. So I think, Becca, you've kind of touched on that idea of like just knowing yourself and why you're doing it is so important into actually staying consistent, really.
Yeah, so I did. We just dropped in a link how to find open source projects to contribute to. That might be helpful. That's a blog post that I wrote. I'm still trying to find the other blog post that I wrote about. It was about doing an evaluation of your skills. I can't
Ooh.
find it, but it's somewhere in our blog. Oh, here, it's actually linked in that blog post. But I can grab the link again here. So this maybe can help you. I find that once I was laid off a couple years ago, and I reached out to somebody that was a mentor, and I was like, I'm laid off, and I was like kind of angry about it. And he really helped to like flip my mental switch and said like, okay, well, what's next? Do a self evaluation. Where are your strengths? Where are your weaknesses? And what's your plan? And that's kind of what I needed, but I find that it's like very helpful to frequently or at least periodically do that kind of assessment to understand yourself and to understand like where can I go, how can I grow, and what are the things that I'm good at. So hopefully this is useful to folks as well.
I think it is. I think it will be. And I can't believe that we're at time. I feel like I looked at the clock 2 minutes ago and it was
I
like
know.
12:30. And now it's 1 and we're at the end. Um Becca, this has been, as always, extremely illuminating, extremely useful. You'll be able to watch this again on YouTube later. Share this channel with people you know. If you know someone who feels like if you feel like someone will benefit from knowing this information, send them to our Twitch channel. Let them know we're here all the time. Send them to Opensauced. Send them to Becca's Twitter. Send them to my Twitter. Help them. They need your help. We can't get the word out without the people in the chat and in our audience doing this. So thank you, Becca, for coming through again. Fantastic, fantastic information as always. Thank you, Morgan, in the back producing and keeping us running nice and easy. Becca, any final things you want to share or say?
Yeah, definitely jump into that discussion. Let us know how we can help you. I'm really looking forward to doing this 100 days with all of you.
Awesome. All right, with that, we're gonna end it and we're gonna head out of here. And appreciate y'all's time today. Have a good one.